Week 16 of the fantasy football season. And here's a few wide receivers I'll get on the wire this week. The first guy, Zay Jones of the Jacksonville Jaguars. I don't know how Zay Jones is still out there in 45% of fantasy leagues here. He's been putting up numbers the last month and a half of the season. Week 12 versus Baltimore. 14 targets, 11 catches, 245 yards, a 2-point conversion. Week 13 at Detroit, 2 catches in that one, 6 yards. Week 14 in Tennessee, 8 catches, 77 yards, a touchdown. And then week 15 versus the Cowboys, he exploded in that one. 6 catches, 109 yards, and 3 touchdowns. So right here, Zay Jones, one of the better wide receivers over the last month of the season. He tops of fantasy points. And week 16, he's got a mediocre matchup at the New York Jets. I know this Jets secondary has been playing pretty good football, but Zay Jones is a guy right now, like I said, he's running hot. If you could get him on your roster this late in the season and use him as a flex option or a number 3 wide receiver, you would have to do it. So Zay Jones and Trevor Lawrence have a good rapport in Zay Jones' first season here with the Jaguars. And it's definitely been a career renaissance for him this year, and he's available in 45% of fantasy leagues. The next wide receiver is KJ Osborne of the Minnesota Vikings. So KJ Osborne had the best game of his career possibly in Week 15, the Indianapolis Colts. And he's starting to get more of an expanded role over the last couple weeks here as Osborne. Week 13 versus the Jets, 2 catches, 17 yards. Week 14 at Detroit, 5 catches, 38 yards, a touchdown. And Week 15 versus Indianapolis, 16 targets in the historic comeback, 10 catches, 157 yards, and a touchdown. So right there, great fantasy day, 31 points in PPR leagues here for Osborne. So right now, available 95% of fantasy leagues. A nice number 3 wide receiver in a stacked offense over there in Minnesota. And he's definitely a guy we'll go out there and get this week, where he's got a good matchup as well versus the New York Giants that are middle of the pack secondary in Week 16. The next wide receiver I look to get on the wire here is Chris Moore of the Houston Texans. So Chris Moore, he looks like he might be the number 1 guy over there with Brandon Cooks out the last couple weeks here, and I don't think they're going to rush him back. And Nico Collins as well, not being a guy who's been consistent and in and out of the lineup as well this season. So Chris Moore, the last few games, like I said, he's getting an expanded role, obviously, for this Houston Texan team. And they want to see what they got with the future. Week 13 versus Cleveland, 3 catches, 46 yards. Week 14 at Dallas, 10 catches, 124 yards. And Week 15 versus the Chiefs, 4 catches, 42 yards. So Week 16, good matchup with the Tennessee Titans that give up the most fantasy points to wide receivers on the season. So Chris Moore, available still in tons of fantasy leagues at 81%. And right now he's operating as the number 1 guy, it looks like, over there for this Texan team. And I would give him an ad this week on the wire. The next wide receiver is Marquise Goodwin of the Seattle Seahawks. So we know Tyler Lockett broke his finger, and he's possibly out for a few games here. So next man up over there, obviously in Seattle. And Geno Smith likes throwing to the receivers. And Marquise Goodwin, we know he's a speed guy, and we know he's a guy that could do some damage in an expanded role. We've seen it. So the last few weeks, not much going on with him, but now he's going to be a starter for the Seattle Seahawks team. Week 13 at the Rams, a catch, 17 yards. Week 14 versus Carolina, in that one, 5 catches, 95 yards, a touchdown. And then Week 15 versus San Francisco, only 2 catches, 10 yards. So right here, Week 16, in a game where they're probably going to be playing catch-up here, is the Seattle Seahawks team. At the Kansas City Chiefs, that give up the 4th most fantasy points to wide receivers on the season. Marquise Goodwin out there in a crazy amount of fantasy leagues, and he plays in a pretty good offense, available in 97% of leagues. I will give him an ad this week. Wide receiver I look to get off the wire this week here is Russell Gage of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So Russell Gage filling in for Julio Jones as the 3rd wide receiver in that ball game versus the Cincinnati Bengals in Week 15. And he had a blow-it-up ball game, was Russell Gage. So the last few weeks here for him, Week 13 versus New Orleans, a catch, 11 yards. Week 14 at the Niners, 2 catches, 12 yards, a touchdown. And Week 15 versus Cincinnati, a big workload, 12 targets, 8 catches, 59 yards, and 2 touchdowns. So Week 16, a pretty good matchup at the Arizona Cardinals here, where their secondary isn't that good. They give up tons of points this season here as Arizona for the most part, and is struggling. And right now, Russell Gage available in tons of leagues. I know he would be a desperation play, but a guy to at least stash and have on your roster this week, available in 87% of fantasy leagues. That's a few wide receivers I look to get off the waiver wire for Week 16 of the fantasy football season.